Here now with us is retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery. Admiral, thank you for joining us. The president is now threatening, President Trump, that is, sanctions against Russia and potentially Putin. But we've heard this before. How likely do you think it is that we see these sanctions manifest, or are the measures taken potentially against Russia?
Well, thank you for having me. And, if President Trump wants to end this conflict, he's going to have to pressure Putin. At this point, Putin is the only recalcitrant member. Zelensky and Ukraine are ready to do some sort, they are ready for a ceasefire and some sort of actual negotiations. President Putin and Russia are not. So if Trump wants that, and that's key to his long-term goals of things like the Nobel Prize and to be known as the peace president, which he has done a good job on in the last 5 months, then he's absolutely going to have to pressure Russia.
NATO Secretary General met with Zelensky in Kyiv, we understand, ahead of Ukraine's Independence Day. Zelensky is accusing Russia of not wanting to meet, as I mentioned a moment ago, saying they really don't want to end to this war. Is Russia avoiding these talks with Ukraine? And if so, why make all this effort to come to the U.S. and meet with the president?
So they are. Russia is 100% doing a thing where they agree in principle to discussions or this, but in practice just delay. Look, I think Putin still thinks he could win this war. It's going to require President Trump to really bring the hammer down with sanctions and weapons transfers.
Yeah, the president now saying there's a 2-week timeline to potentially do that. Let me pivot for a second here, turning to the war in Israel, because for the first time, a UN-backed group of officials are declaring a famine in Gaza. Israel Prime Minister, though, Benjamin Netanyahu, quickly trying to deny these claims, saying the report is an outright lie and doesn't take into account recent aid efforts that were sent by Israel. What kind of pressure does this now add to the ceasefire negotiations there?
Look, I think first, there may well be the conditions established for a famine in terms of food getting delivered, but, we're kind of quickly jumping to somehow the idea of the Israeli Defense Force or the Israelis are responsible, when in fact, Hamas wants to govern this, Gaza so much that they want power so much that they're willing to put their people at risk with the failure to distribute food. So I think that this is going to, I think this will put some pressure on Israel, but I think Israel is going to push back pretty hard on the narrative that they're responsible.
To that end, then, if they push back to they're not responsible, and there's a plausible kind of, situation where that's the case, when you look at this war, where do we get to the point where we're at a negotiation table and we see some sort of end here?
This is going to be tough because what the mission given to the Israeli Defense Force is one they didn't want. They do not want to occupy all of Gaza. This is a recipe for disaster for the Israeli military. They pushed back hard on Prime Minister Netanyahu, who didn't get there. So I think this is not going to be pretty. I think there's going to be a lot of casualties. I think it's very difficult. They're putting the lives of the remaining the living hostages at risk with these things. So I hope they can get to a ceasefire soon, because if they don't, I think this is going to be painful for all parties involved.
Yeah, it has been a painful, couple of years between the war in Russia and Ukraine and the war in Israel, or in Gaza with Israel and Hamas there. Rear Admiral, really appreciate your insight here. Retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery. Thank you.